On Thursday, Congressman Jim Himes and Democratic Whip Maryland Congressman Steny Hoyer met with the Business Council of Fairfield County to discuss economic infrastructure. Here are some of the highlights.
We also, Chris, never talk about in the political game where it's all about some president's malfeasance or a party's incompetence or whatever. We never talk about what has got to be one of the top three drivers of the fiscal mess we're in, that it's nobody's fault. It's very simply the demographic change in this country over the last 2 generations, right? Half of our federal outlays are Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Most of that at our senior population, and it's wonderful. Senior poverty rates in the 1920s were 60 and 75%. Today it's under 10%. That's a staggering human achievement. But when your pyramid, it hasn't inverted, but of course we have an awful lot more elderly population now relative to the base of the pyramid. If you could find a way, a rational, thoughtful way to bring in a younger, economically hungry population, all of a sudden your Social Security and your Medicare problems, some of the pressure is off as well. But you know, we don't get to talk about that because unfortunately this is an issue at the very top of the list of those that people like to demagogue and create some emotion and create some fear. And
2 days after the election in '06, so this would have been on the Thursday after the Tuesday election in '06, President Bush invited to-be Speaker Pelosi and me. I was then the minority whip, as I am now, but I was to be the majority leader. Invited us down to the White House. We had lunch with Vice President Cheney, Andy Card, President Nancy, and myself. One of the issues we talked about was immigration reform. One of the things that he said, I'm going to have a lot easier time with you than I had with my own party. That was correct. I think George Bush's dealing with a comprehensive immigration program was absolutely correct. Now we had some differences on specifics, but the George Bush, President Bush's proposal on comprehensive immigration reform, and unfortunately what happened was his party in the Senate left it. And so we didn't get to move it forward. But we need to deal with this. Constantly ignoring it is not going to serve our country well. Out there, $1.1 trillion in tax expenditures. Now the interesting thing about $1.1 trillion, you know how much money we spend on all discretionary spending? You know, tax expenditures, you know, preference items, loopholes, you know, that's a sort of a colored word on a pejorative term, but you know, whatever preference items are. 1.1 trillion. All discretionary spending at the federal level, all 1.1 trillion. Now it's 1.08 to 1 point, you know, but it's almost exactly the same thing, which means, and our deficit, our deficit is 1.4 trillion. So if you said, I know we got the press here, but my perfect tax system, which I'm not advocating, however, would be no preferences. And that every one of us, whether it's in our family life or in our corporate life, would make decisions on what's best for our family, what's best for our business, not on what the most preferable tax consequence is. Because I think that skews decision-making in a way that undermines efficiency. It does, in fact, if you're a corporate leader, serve your fiduciary responsibility to maximize profits. Because if your tax consequence is less harsh or more, more harsh, that will affect your bottom line. But paying for things is not, and that's my point on whether the highway bill is going to pass or not, because the needs are great and the willingness to invest in accomplishing those needs, I'm not sure is there.
There's a whole series of questions that we can't answer, and despite the whip's seniority, none of us know. And by the way, there are questions of huge consequence, like are we going to gracefully figure out a way to raise the nation's debt ceiling? If we don't do that, we are messing around with the full faith and credit of the United States of America. There is another question which is very important, which is the government shut down on April 8th, because that's when the CR ends? We have no idea, because the dynamics on the majority side right now, and I say this utterly without prejudice and without any sort of partisan slant on it, are politically very interesting right now. the Speaker of the House does not control his caucus. The CR that we passed last Tuesday passed only because Democrats voted for it. He lost 54 of his own members, couldn't have passed with the Republican majority. We've seen this now for 3 months. They brought the Patriot Act to the floor on suspension, anticipating they'd have the 2/3 vote. They did not have. Time and time again, the new members on his party, who sometimes get characterized as Tea Party members, whatever, it's probably more complicated than that, are not yet part of the operation. And so we all sit back and watch this happening and saying, yes, he's Speaker of the House, but it's just not clear that he has the ability to control the majority. And until he comes up with some working model to truly control the majority, which is really what matters in the House of Representatives, all of this stuff is very, very much unknown. And the transportation is, to everybody in this room, absolutely essential. But you know, we got some near-term stuff like debt ceiling and the budget that I think are as much hostage to that question as anything else.
Let me just give you a little bit of flavor of that. The issue Mr. Boehner really has, or any leader of a majority party has, is how many members of his own caucus is he willing to give up? If he can make common cause with the other side and make a majority in coalition. Gingrich's point was, and Hastert, Speaker Hastert was, you need to have a majority of the majority. He'll have a majority of the majority. They've got 243 members, so 122 is a majority of the majority. Now that, you know, is much less than 218, which is a majority of the House. But we gave him 84 votes to pass the CR that's currently in place. I was one of those 84 votes. We, interestingly enough, shifted almost. The first CR, 104 of us Democrats voted with the Republicans. This time, 84. My own view is I'm not going to vote for another short-term CR. You cannot run the largest enterprise in the world on a 2-week cycle.